Hey everybody! So today we're going to talk about some more about the IC and planets conjunct the IC. This is the card in the star cards. We didn't actually do an IC card. In future editions, we'd like to have an IC, MC, ascendant, and descendant card, a card for each of those. On the star cards, the IC is mentioned on the 4th house card. But if you're using something like like whole signs, the IC will float. It might be in the 3rd house, 4th house, 5th house, sometimes even the 2nd. That does happen. That can happen. But if you use something like Placidus or Porphyry or anything like that, the IC will be the cusp of the 4th house. So that's probably why it got put on the 4th house card. But it can, depending on what house system you create your chart with, it could be in, like the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. That's usually when you use whole signs, that's where it'll fall. But it can fall in like the 2nd. That can happen. So I guess I'm saying this in case I slip up and say 4th house cusp instead of saying IC. I'll try not to do that, so it's not confusing. But if I do that, bear with me. Because by default, I do use Placidus by default. If nothing else it's what I like to use for myself when I look at charts for other people that I know or whatever. But that's what I play with the most. So but the IC is, it's like the midnight of the chart. Like we talked about the descendant being like where the chart sets. The IC is like the midnight of the chart. So it's the part of the chart that is deeply, deeply personal. It is deeply, deeply private. It's all of those things. It's the core of a person. It's your core. I would be careful about tying it in with family all of the time, with home and family, just because if you are using different chart systems, the IC can float. I would really think of the IC as more of the core. It certainly can play into family, right? Like it certainly can. Family and home. But I would think of that is more of like the 4th house, whereas the IC, this cardinal point, or personal point, or whatever you want to call it, major angle, whatever you want to call it, this really is more like the core of the person, regardless of what chart system you use, regardless of what house it falls. It is more like the core of the person, and that's kind of how I would look at this in terms of planets being conjunct the IC, as these planets having some kind of a major bearing on the core of the person. Obviously, you'd want to take the whole chart into account, but to get a better idea, but that is kind of the way that I would go with it. So today will be, in the last video we talked about, I talked about the Sun through Mars. In this one, I'll be talking about Jupiter through Pluto, and I'll be also mentioning Chiron. Okay, so Jupiter conjunct the IC. We're taking signs out of it right now. The sign the IC falls out of the equation, just looking at Jupiter conjunct the IC. So if you have Jupiter conjunct the IC, or you're looking at a chart with somebody that's got Jupiter conjunct the IC, my mind would probably first go to beliefs and truth. This being a big deal to this person, to the person's core. Obviously, what house cusp Sagittarius is on in the chart, that house will bend to Jupiter. If you like using traditional rulership, you could also look at the house cusp that Neptune falls on, or not Neptune, sorry, Pisces. Pisces falls in the chart, and that house will also bend to Jupiter conjunct the IC. So I would definitely look at those to kind of get an idea as to how all of this plays out. Dispositions are very important for that. But Jupiter conjunct the IC, you're definitely looking at stuff about beliefs and truth. I think those are probably the big ones. Things like understanding also. The person might have there might be a need to really understand things at their core. This might be what Jupiter wants to express. This person could be very optimistic at their core. They could be. They could be very lucky at their core. These are also ways that it could go. Let me see. They might be very grateful at their core. There are lots of ways that you could go with this, lots of different keywords you could kind of plug in to play with to see if they fit. Not every keyword for every planet, like on the star cards, are keywords, right? Just ideas for you to play with. It doesn't mean that all of those are going to fit. You know, you have to play around with it, but certainly when you're looking at Jupiter conjunct the IC, beliefs and truth, that's where my mind would go first. It might not stay there, but that is where it would go first. I would then want to play with everything else to see kind of how that would actually fit, if it would actually fit. Okay, so Saturn. Let's see if Saturn conjunct the IC. Okay, so Saturn conjunct the IC. You might be looking at somebody who feels like they have a lot of restrictions at their core. They might feel this. I don't necessarily think that has to be the case, or it has to even be true, but they might feel that way. They might feel that way. There might be something going on with too many boundaries at their core. This might be a good thing, really. I mean, it could be. I don't know. It depends on what else is going on in the chart, but there might be something going on with boundaries. With Saturn, you'd probably be looking at too many. Perhaps back to restriction, or feeling restricted. The person might also feel limited in some way. There could be some kind of limited feeling. Again, I don't necessarily think that this is actually the way it is. It doesn't have to be, but the person might just feel that way. Because as I've talked about before with Saturn, I think wants you to break through these things, these limitations, these restrictions. He wants you to be like, fuck you, I'm breaking through this. So while the person may feel this way, I think it's probably a test at their core to break through it, to break through these things, probably. They might also, there could be a lot of mastery at their core. That's really probably what the goal is to have core mastery, authority over the core of their being. It seems really possible. Doesn't necessarily mean they feel that way either, but it's probably how they need to go with it, what they need to learn. And you'd want to look at the house cusp that Capricorn is on in the chart, because that house will bend to Saturn conjunct the IC. If you use traditional rulership too, and I think it's great to use traditional and modern rulership, you would then want to also look at the house cusp that Aquarius is on in the chart, because it will also bend to Saturn if you want to use traditional rulership too. Okay, so Uranus. Let's say that's conjunct the IC. So Uranus is, I might think the person, the first thing that comes to mind is they're probably kind of weird. They're probably kind of weird at their core. I like weird, so that doesn't bother me. I don't think it's a bad thing. Though it could be, depends on how they feel about it. This may or may not bother them. But there probably is like some weirdness or some difference or some being kind of eccentric at their core. I could see those things being the case. Uranus can be chaotic. It can be chaotic. There might be some chaos at their core too. There may or may not be like a purpose for this. I would probably, ask myself, like I mentioned in the other video, another video that I posted this week, I don't remember which one, I like to think about the chart as like, why would the person have wanted their chart to look this way in this lifetime? So maybe the chaos is something that if you wanted to go with chaos here for Uranus, there's probably a purpose for it. Person also might be kind of a revolutionary at their core. That seems possible too. Okay, Neptune. Neptune conjunct the IC. I would think the person is probably pretty spiritual at their core. That would be one of the first ways. Creative and like their imagination is probably incredible. They probably need an outlet to exercise this. Neptune can also be kind of cloudy though. So I might, and it lacks boundaries. So I might think that the person lacks boundaries at their core, may not be as great at enforcing boundaries, their own personal boundaries. They might also have issues with people kind of walking on their boundaries, their core boundaries. On the flip side of that, they may not understand boundaries with other people, and they might kind of do something similar. They might kind of evade other people's boundaries too. It just depends on the whole chart and kind of what it looks like, right? As to how you want to go with this. There also might be some core clouding. Like the person may not be completely clear about who they are at their core. That's always possible as well. You'd want to look at the house that Pisces is on the cusp of. That will bend to Neptune conjunct the IC. It'll kind of give you a better idea of what's going on and which way to go with this. I didn't say this for Uranus, but you want to look at the house cusp that Aquarius is on. That will bend to Uranus conjunct the IC. Okay, Pluto. Pluto conjunct the IC. I would think you're looking at somebody who's probably pretty powerful at their core. Probably a lot of power there. There's probably a lot of magnetism. I might think there's also there's probably a lot of transformation. The person probably does have an inclination to transform. They might also have an inclination to destroy. Though Pluto it does destroy, but it does rebuild. It does. I mean, it destroys so better things can come, if you will. So things can transform. So, depending on what house cusp Scorpio's on in the chart, that will bend to Pluto conjunct the IC. That would kind of depend on how, it would kind of help to show which way to go with this. There might even be some obsessions and compulsions at the person's core. They might have some things that they are obsessive compulsive about, that perhaps also need to be worked through. That's always possible, but you would want to look at what house cusp Scorpio's on to give you a better idea as to how to go with this. And obviously any aspects that any of these planets conjunct the IC make, you want to look at those too, take the whole fucking thing into account. These are just some ideas. Okay, Chiron conjunct the IC. Chiron conjunct the IC, that does make me think that the person is, there probably is core wounding. There probably is. However, at the same time, because Chiron can be very, very healing, I would imagine that the person probably does have a real ability to heal too. Themselves and other people. I think it can play out. Like they could be very, very healing at their core for others. They could use that wounding that way. It would obviously depend on what all Chiron is doing in the chart otherwise, but that core wounding is probably what you are looking at. Jesus, that's loud. Core wounding probably is what you're looking at. And for this, for conjunctions to the IC, I would probably look at, here I'd probably look at 5 degrees applying and separating. If you want to widen it, you can. 5 degrees applying and separating is just probably where I would go with it first. May not stay there, but that's probably where I would start. But yeah, so I'm going to get going. If you want to follow us on Instagram, you can find us at Let's Fuck With Astrology. I'm at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Paterno Astrology on Instagram. If you want to like or subscribe or whatever the fuck people do with videos on YouTube, you can find us by searching for Let's Fuck With Astrology in the YouTube search bar. If you do the Reddit thing, come join us on the subreddit Let's Fuck With Astrology. And if you're interested in the star cards, go to letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. Okay, y'all. I'll see y'all later.